Really appreciate you. If you can't hear me in the back, let me know. Really appreciate you guys doing the evaluation forms. They'll be coming around a little bit. Okay, so my name is Tony Raia. I'm from the EPA's Office of Underground Storage Tanks. I have the distinct pleasure of being the Release Prevention Division Director since January of 2017. Before that, I have about 18 plus years experience elsewhere at the EPA in programs like RCRA Corrective Action, Brownfields, and Enforcement and Compliance. Before that, I served as active duty in the Army for about 5 years. I'm going to go into a little bit more bioinformation when I call up the other speakers, but for now we have Kevin Henderson, Mahesh Albuquerque, and Robert May. I want to hold all questions till we're all done. That includes questions from the webinar, right? And so I'm the first speaker. I'm just going to do a very rudimentary, basic overlay of what the federal requirements are for inspecting and testing these sumps and spill buckets. So there's 3 ways to inspect. You could inspect according to the provisions described in the 2015 UST regulation itself. You could inspect according to a code of practice developed by a nationally recognized association, RP 900, or you can inspect according to the way your implementing agency, like your state, comes up with another scheme, so long as it's comparable to 1 and 2 above. So the federal regulations is pretty basic for spills, spill buckets and sumps. You're checking for damage and leaks to the containment area. For the spill bucket, you're removing liquid and debris. For the spill bucket, you're checking the caps and the fill pipes, of course. And for double walls, of course, you're checking the interstice. So this is a very basic checklist that we've developed. Now, Kevin's going to go into a much more robust practical guide that we developed a number of years ago, going to go into a lot of detail. And I might add all our speakers are going to go into a lot more detail than I'm just going to stay at the surface here. They're going to talk about some real practical approaches and some real challenges that we're facing in this area. So I'd like to stand up here and say that we got the federal regulation perfect and we never get any questions, but that would be a lie. And so one of the basic questions that came in about a year ago was, do I need to do this annual sump inspection for other sump areas like non-sumps, sumps with that aren't used for interstitial monitoring? We're like, of course. It was basically the EPA's intent for everyone to, at very least, go around once a year and check all these sump areas. So we looked at our regs, and lo and behold, it wasn't that clear, but we fixed that. I'll show you at the end just a technical compendium, if you haven't heard of this, where we're help clarifying certain parts of our regulation. All right, switching to testing really quick. So beginning no later than October 13th, 2018, the federal deadline, of course, you're going to test all spills at least once every 3 years, ensuring that it's liquid tight using vacuum pressure or liquid. And then for all sumps that are used for interstitial monitoring of piping, again, at least once every 3 years to ensure liquid tight using vacuum pressure or liquid. Conduct these tests according to manufacturer's instructions, code of practice, RP 1200, or requirements determined by the implementing agency to be no less protective of human health and the environment. This is the provision that spawned the low-level alternate containment sump testing. Just quick about that, but advertisement for the next session. We're doing a full 90 minutes on that, so if you're interested in that, please come to the next session. But in general, PMAA, the Petroleum Marketers Association of America, came to us kind of on a national level, EPA, and wanted to know whether they could do this low-level testing with just a sensor. We did some analysis, talked to a lot of people, and we thought that if you couple it with automatic shutdown, then you're no less protective of human health and the environment. So how do you get, is there any way to get, according to the federal regs, any way to get out of these triennial testing requirement? Yes, there is. Spill buckets and containment sumps that are double-walled, and the integrity of both walls for spill buckets is monitored every 30 days at least, or at least annually. For containment sumps, you're exempt. You don't have to do the triennial testing. Another question that came into us about a year ago, and they're probably talking about it earlier than that, but we officially answered it about a year ago, was, and this is basically for EPA, Indian country, where EPA is the implementing agency, is about dry interstice, spill buckets, and containment sumps. They don't, according to us, they don't meet the exemption. However, SPA states, you can make the call on this, and I know of at least several states that are allowing dry interstice to be exempt from the 3-year testing requirement. Just really quick wrapping up. So some reminders, of course, while you're doing these tests or inspections, you're going to have to report to your implementing agency if you find a release, if you find unusual operating conditions and don't immediately fix it. And then, of course, after you do a repair, if you find something during an inspection or a test, you got to test it again within 30 days. For more information, of course, our website, here's that technical compendium I referred to. I said 1 or 2 questions, we got about 50 in, so we hope that this tool, you're kind of late in the game for the October deadline, but some of the states are still finishing up their regs and going to be implementing a few years down the road. We hope this tool is very helpful for them. And let me put a plug out to all the states that have revised their regs. We have a tracking board out there at our OUST booth. 29 states have revised their regs based on the 2015 regulations. So congratulations to those states, and appreciate the other states continuing to drive on to that. There's my name and contact info. And without further ado, I will introduce our next speaker. He needs no intro for many of you, but he was just telling me earlier that that he only knows about a quarter of the room. I would have thought it was more. The one, the only, I like to affectionately call him the Matthew McConaughey of the tanks program. And a little bit about Kevin. Kevin Henderson is a consulting storage tanks professional providing training and regulatory compliance related services with 27 years of UST experience. He is widely recognized as an expert in the field. Kevin? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tony. All right, so here we go. So, a lot of new faces in the room. Don't know you. If you don't really believe I'm from Mississippi, if you can't tell that from my dialect, let me prove it to you, okay? Trump Tower, Chicago. This is a high-rise, right? Well, where I'm from, this is a high-rise, okay? Yeah, it's true. But, okay, so that proves it, right? I am from Mississippi. You have any trouble hearing me? Mr. Rinkus is used to me. He'll translate for you. Okay, here we go. So a lot to talk about in a very short period of time. This business about containment sump inspections. Why did I choose to talk about this? Well, it's because I think the reality is, from all of the pushback that we've gotten from the testing requirements, I don't think there's going to be a lot of containment sump testing going on. Everybody's doing everything they can to not have to test the sumps, right? And it's not going away. This is going to continue. So what we're left with is somebody needs to look at it once a year. That's pretty much going to be it for a lot of these sumps that we have that we think are going to be tight. So that's why I'm talking about this. We need to establish just what is a sump, of course, because it is a little bit confusing. Thanks to a number of things, but yeah, we need to understand just what is a sump. What does the inspection involve? You know, this is a central question that I have because, okay, you want me to go look at the sump? I got to do this inspection. Well, what is it exactly that I'm looking for? What do you want me to do? I'm not really absolutely sure what this is, and if I do see something that looks out of place, out of character, or suspicious, what am I supposed to do? What's my action? So really, I'm asking some questions here to help you understand. This is more complicated than it really was. A lot of people just kind of overlooked this containment sump inspection requirement as being a sort of irrelevant and by-the-way thing. I think it's much more than that. And so we've got to be very careful how we look at this. It can get snaky. All right, that's how we say it where I'm from. So a couple of documents we can look at to help us with this, one of which is a fairly old document from the federal EPA, sort of forgotten about by a lot of people, but it's from 2005. This document was published about just this subject, inspecting and maintaining sumps and spill buckets. So it's kind of relevant today. Let's go back and look at this again. That's basically what I'm going to do is look at this document. Everybody is familiar with RP 900. RP 900 is a great document. I'm not going to talk about it very much just because everybody's familiar with that, right? Yeah, it's very well known. So what is a sump? EPA definition of a containment sump includes a lot of different things, apparently. So it's contained sump, uncontained sump, and they do include spill buckets as sumps. They consider that to be a sump. I think everybody else sort of has a different idea of just what is a containment sump, or a sump, period, right? Traditionally, I think everybody looked at a sump as being a structure, a definable structure, of fiberglass or thermoplastics that we could actually look at and say, yeah, is it tight or is it not tight? And then everything else is just a manhole, right? So it was either a structure, a containment structure that may or not actually be tight, or it's just it's in the dirt. It's a manhole. So yeah, we can look at these pictures and say, yeah, these are obviously sumps, right? Well-defined structure, it's got walls, it's got a floor, and yeah, theoretically it should be tight. So yeah, these are sumps. And then there's all kinds of questions that we can raise about, well, what do you call this? Well, I think everybody's still going to call these sumps, right? Even though they vary in degrees of integrity, if you will. But yeah, they're still containment sumps are supposed to be, right? But I got news for you. These ain't no sumps, man. Okay? These are manholes, right? They're in the dirt. This is not what anybody calls a sump, with one exception, right? That one exception being the 2005 federal EPA guidance document. They called these sumps. Okay, so let's go with that. These are sumps. That means we have to inspect them. And of course, this was I think the whole purpose and idea behind this is to force everybody to at least look in these manholes at least once a year. And what are we looking for? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? What am I supposed to be looking at? I'm sorry, Tony, but this is not a sump, man. I just don't buy it. So we're not going to talk about spill buckets. Mahesh is going to talk about spill buckets. Okay, so this is the EPA guidance document, and this is their laundry list of titles to the chapters, if you will, of what you do to properly inspect and maintain a sump. So we're going to walk through each one of these bullets really quick. Just don't have much time, of course, but we're going to walk through this and take a little quick look and see what the EPA intended to happen. So the first one is, are the lids tight and sealed correctly? Well, this obviously has become a major focus in the industry because a lot of times, especially if you're down south or in a high rainfall area, every time it rains, what happens to your tight containment sump? It gets water in it. How? Through the lid. This is a very common scenario. So the lid has become quite a bit of a focus because getting water in the containment sump just is not the idea, right? So yeah, the lid has become a rather important issue. Then are these sump walls intact? Well, I think this is obviously pretty clear. And, I'll say this one time and not repeat myself, I hope. A lot of this, what we talk about, related to these containment sumps inspections, is related to actual, what we call containment sump, right? One that is supposed to be tight. So we have a lot of sumps out there that were put in before the secondary containment rules became effective in whatever state you're in. In most states, not everyone, but most states say, well, if it was put in before my secondary containment rule went into effect, that it doesn't really matter if it's tight or not. If you want to do interstitial monitoring, then obviously it must be tight, and you need to be concerned about this. But if it's not an interstitial monitoring scenario, maybe you're doing something else to be in compliance with the leak detection requirements because you can, because it's an old system. Maybe you're just doing a line tightness test. Does it really matter about the condition of the sump? No, it doesn't matter. You've got a single-wall system with something that you call a sump, but it's not really a containment sump. So we're going to say that one time and understand that and keep that in mind. A lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about applies to containment sumps, those that are tight or are supposed to be tight. Okay? So clearly, this could just be a single-wall system, right? Debris, liquid, or ice. Okay, so not a really great picture. You probably can't see it, but this is more proof that I am, in fact, from Mississippi, because the top picture, that funny-looking pink fuzzy stuff, anybody know what that is? Yeah, that is Owens Corning pink insulation, house insulation. Why is it there? What possible reason could some crazy redneck from Mississippi have for putting this in their sump? It's not an OC tank. Good guess, though. The dude actually looked at me with a straight face and told me that, yeah, I know, I'm not stupid, man. I think that I can get my flow rate to go higher. My pumps will run faster if they're kept warm and hot. Nice, dude. Yeah, let's go with that. Okay. And I have no idea what you mean by ice in the sump, right? That means nothing to me. Maybe Steve, Wisconsin, or somebody, but no, not me. Really don't know what that means. The liquid in the sumps, again, we've got most of my so-called containment sumps in Mississippi were put in before the new rule came into effect in 2008 in Mississippi. So guess what? Virtually every one of them has water in it. Do I have to remove that water to do this inspection? No. EPA has said, no, you don't. If it doesn't have to be tight, it's full of water, no, you don't really need to worry about it. So that raises another set of questions. Is the sump free of cracks and holes? Well, this is kind of the same thing we just looked at about the walls being intact or not. This happens to be a failure of the floor again, and this is the same deal, right? Does it need to be tight or not? So this question, are the components leak-free? This is the central question that was the entire impetus, really, the whole reason that this came about is somebody go out once a year and just look to see, is there something leaking? Is there something going on that I should be aware of, right? Audio on this. Yeah, we do have trucks in Mississippi, okay? But yeah, that's the idea. This is the whole concept. Obviously, if it's leaking, I got a problem. I need to fix the leak. The more central question is coming up there, right? Again, so is the sump free of staining or new staining? So again, this probably would only be an issue or is only an issue if the sump must be tight, all right? So a lot of times you can tell a lot just by looking at a sump. You don't really need to test it to understand where is this sump integrity compromised at, right? Where is the bathtub ring go to? 9 times out of 10, that's going to tell you where the breach in that sump is. Well, this one's very obvious. Not hard to figure out. I don't need to test the sump to figure this out, right? And of course, this is the proverbial problem with electronic interstitial monitoring, right? There's no surprise here. There's nothing new. This has been going on for years and years. So I'm just going to take a minute to, this may come as a shock to you. I know I'm going to give you my opinion on this, related to low-level testing, right? So this whole low-level testing business has come about for obvious reasons, a lot of good reasons. The concept being I'm going to install an electronic sensor in the bottom of the sump, and it will shut down the STP if anything ever triggers the alarm, right? Okay, great concept, really cool idea. Yeah, this is great. But do you really believe that people are going to resist the temptation to pick that little sensor up out of that water and you make that alarm go away for today and I'll deal with it later? And then, oh yeah, we just forgot about that, man, sorry. Right? Because this story has been repeated how many times? And how many times more will it have to happen before we stop this practice from occurring? I don't think we're ever going to stop it. So yeah, I'm kind of dubious of low-level sump testing for this reason. But it is what it is, right? Are all the penetrations into the sump in good condition? So again, this is a visual thing. I don't really need to test anything because many times I can see that the boots are not tight. This is not hard to figure out. So yeah, I think this is a great benefit to just doing a simple visual inspection. You can tell just by looking in most cases, is the sump tight or not. And then this issue about test boots. Are the test boots in good condition and positioned correctly? So this is where it does get a little funky, okay? Because with the way that we build these double-walled piping systems, there are many, many different ways to do this, right? There are lots of different systems out there. You know, most of what we think about traditionally as a test boot is what you see in these pictures is a little rubber with 2 clamps on it and a Schrader valve. Okay, that's what everybody's used to seeing. Maybe you've got crossovers in it, maybe you don't. The typical test boots, right? Intended only for the initial test of the secondary containment on the pipe, right? That's really the only thing they were ever designed to do. And then people got the idea that putting these crossovers in, which were originally just for testing purposes only, right? If I leave these crossovers in, somehow this has gotten so twisted that it now is magic. That the UDC, the under dispenser containment sump, is not part of the secondary containment because you got this little tube that connected this side to that side. Right? And there's a lot of people who have bought off on this. This is one of the more bizarre things to me that has come out of this whole sump testing thing, is now everybody is running to this. Because why? Well, now don't you see? I do not have to test the sump because I got the little crossover tube in, man. It does not become part of the monitoring of the piping secondary containment somehow. And this is just ridiculous. This is crazy. Because you got to show me, this is a, quote, double-walled piping system, right? And you're going to tell me that that containment sump does not serve as secondary containment just because you connected one side to the other across this T. That's ridiculous. There are all kinds of single-walled components of that pipe system within every one of these sumps. Now, honestly, I suspect in the near future we will see the advent of completely double-walled piping systems all the way up to and including the base of the shear valve. And at that point, yes, there will be a legitimate argument made that the containment sump is not part of the secondary containment. But every system that's out there on the market today, you cannot say that. There are single-walled components of this pipe in every sump there is. What does that mean? That means every sump must be monitored. Oh my God, what did he just say? That means every sump must be tested. Oh, I can't, oh hell no, I can't do that. And this is where we're at today, right? So this is why we're going to get these sump inspections. You know, all kinds of different ways to build these systems even today. Double-wall fittings. I mean, you've got to be able to recognize this stuff. The point is, it's not your everyday contractor going to be able to go out and look at these systems and really determine what the true answer is about how this is set up. How is it intended to be monitored? How is the secondary containment intended to be installed? It's kind of complicated, and it's getting more complicated. And, of course, are they positioned correctly? This is what it's about, really. If I do have some kind of boot, is it positioned correctly? And then, look, this is the main reason why there was so much fighting and controversy about testing the sump in the beginning, right? Because everybody knew that a lot of these systems were put in with no test boot to begin with at all anyway. It's true. And there's still lots of them out there like this. So this positioning thing. There's many different ways to go about doing this. Most people like to see the boot clamps loosened completely and the boot pulled completely out of the way so that you can visually see the pipe interstitial open to the sump, right? Yeah? Does it have to be that way? No, in a lot of systems, no, it doesn't have to be. But you need to make sure that it's open to that sump if it needs to be, right? And so that becomes another question. Do I need to be open to the containment sump or not with the pipe interstitial? People look at this differently. So in this scenario, this is the terminating dispenser, right? It's just a 90. There is no T. I got test boots in place. The Schrader valves are closed. Does this need to be open or not? People interpret this a lot of different ways. So this is where it gets complicated about doing the sump inspection. What needs to be open? What needs to be closed? What's the state interpretation? It just goes on and on and on. All right, so this is the larger question, right? Is it in good condition or not? Well, what does this really mean? Okay, so let's look at it. How am I going to quantify this? Well, clearly, there's nothing wrong here. It's brand new. Everything's perfect. We're going to call that excellent, right? All right, so this one looks pretty good to me. I don't see anything wrong. Done some repair work, apparently, but everything looks good condition, right? Okay. This one's all right. This is okay. Yes, it's got a little bit of a corrosion issue. We can see some beginnings of some things going on. But you know what? It looks pretty good to me. It's okay. Here, I've got some components of the piping that are beginning to corrode up, oxidize. Doesn't look that bad. Maybe. And, of course, we've all seen the really ugly stuff, right? This is clearly having some corrosion issues, some corrosion problems. How do you quantify it? How do you classify it? This one clearly looks pretty bad to me. And then, of course, you get these things like this. Yes, in fact, this is from Mississippi, okay? Yeah, I'm kind of baffled. To what degree, well, my point is, where do you draw the line? Where do you say that, okay, I've done my annual containment sump inspection, and this one is so ugly that I got to do something about it. Something needs to be done. Something has to happen. So I realized that recently the SWAMO has made an attempt to answer this question, right? Yeah, at least you've tried. They got their 3-tiered rating system. Mine's a little more tiers to it. But the fundamental question is, it really is kind of just a subjective thing, right? Looks okay to me. No, that looks like dog crap to me. And I think it's all right. Which one is it? And then, of course, everybody realizes now that copper does have issues. Everybody, this is a very famous picture that was taken in South Carolina from the E85 tank. It's been published hundreds of times. It was actually a Steel Tank Institute class where we were looking at cathodic protection. Cathodic protection ain't going to help you here, man, okay? This is a totally different subject. But the one on the right is a thing I've seen in Mississippi a few times. It's a really, really ugly fungus that's growing on copper. And I'm hoping that somebody in the audience will recognize this, who knows a lot more about fungi than I do, and tell me just what the hell this is. Because when you see this, it is the kiss of death. That copper is not long for this world. All right, so let's move on. I'm still on this question, but I don't have to remove the water. If the sump does not have to be tied, I don't have to remove the water. So what do you want me to look at? I'm looking at the funk, okay? Yeah, it looks funky to me, man. I guess, the idea is there any free product floating on top of the water, right? Well, if it's a diesel system, the likelihood is that there is. I don't know. And I'm hoping somebody in the audience can tell me what this red tide is, because I see this a lot in Mississippi, and I don't know what that critter is. Clearly, the idea here is, again, if you do have free product, you need to remove it. And that's why we're looking at it. If there is no containment sump there, I still have to open the manhole and look. Sometimes all I see is sand, mud, dirt, whatever you want to call it. Do I need to dig it out to visually examine anything, or can I just look at the dirt and go, check mark, it's dirt? Somebody please give me an idea of what this is. It is from Mississippi again, and I have no idea what this monster is. Ah, yes. We're not just looking at the pump head, are we? No, the idea is let's check out the pipe. So I think everybody understands this, but I couldn't resist the temptation to bring back these memory lane photos, okay? This goes way back for me. But yeah, we are looking at the pipe. The pipe is important. We can see and tell a lot about the condition of the pipe just by looking at the very ends of it, because almost all the pipe failures occur at the ends of the pipe. So it does serve a very real purpose to look at the pipe, anticipating a failure before it happens, right? And this question is an age-old one also. At what point do you say, it looks too bad, I need to do something? No one's ever had an answer for that, right? I never have. I think we can see from that, you need to do something. Somebody did something here. This is not from Mississippi, this is from Jersey, okay? So this was an attempt to repair it, so this raises a whole different set of questions. What this is a piece of delivery hose that was split in half, put over the pipe, and hose clamped together. Okay, so the company no longer exists, so you can't say is that repair in accordance with the manufacturer's requirements. Where's the repair standard to say you can't do this? I think some people are working on it, right? Yeah, that's what I understand. Well, what must I do? This is, again, fundamental to this, right? Yeah, it looks like crap to me. What am I supposed to do? So this is the checklist that EPA put together in 2005. And, of course, I'm not going to walk through all this. What it does is it asks these questions of every title of the chapters that we just went through. And what they've said is, you are not required to report maintenance activities. So if you see something ugly, am I required to report it? Apparently not. Only if it's free product, right? You see free product in the sump or in the dirt, that's reportable. But otherwise, no. You just fix it. When? How? No, that's a big question, right? Choose yes or no for each question that applies. Choosing no on any item indicates a problem that should be corrected. Well, that helps a lot. When you have corrected the problem, check the fixed box and everything's cool, right? So you see where I'm trying to go with this. It's just lots of things about this sump inspection that are just not black and white. There is no clear answer. Don't like the EPA's document? Yes, you can always go to RP 900. It is an alternative. It's not a repair standard again. It doesn't really tell you when. You have to take action. Really much describes how you do the inspection again. So I think you get the idea, right? There are lots of snakes in these sumps, man. Do not get bit. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Our next speaker is Mr. Robert May. Robert is a Senior Vice President with Synergy Environmental, a full-service environmental consulting firm that provides turnkey consulting. Rob is a licensed UST inspector, installer, and tester.
So today, all that hydro test water is basically going to be a story about some of my clients and on their path to the trying to keep them in compliance. So let's see here. So basically, just for for your basic information, all the regulations changed 2005. Here are the things from the EPA website basically talking about the changes. But, Ohio does not have state program approval. So we're going to talk a lot about Ohio today because that's where most of my practice has been in the last 6 months or so. But what happens in Ohio is underground storage tanks are regulated by the fire marshal, fire department. And it's called BUSTER, Bureau of Underground Storage Tank Regulations. But waste and releases to the environment are regulated by Ohio EPA. But back in December last year, they published a new guidance on how to be in compliance with the new regs. So the regs are now in effect in Ohio, and of course a deadline of October 13th. Basically, it's the same thing, monthly walk-around inspections, spill bucket prevention, and a double wall tank testing and things like that, the tank top containment. So I usually have a picture like this because every once in a while when I teach UST operator class in Ohio, someone's in the class that doesn't normally have responsibility for. It's like, hey, I'm the second guy in charge. I got sent here, and I don't know really much about anything. So I always have 1 or 2 slides covering the basics. So this is like slide number 1 basic. This is what your tank top should look like, just to get oriented, and that's what is known as a spill bucket. So in Ohio, probably different than most other states, a qualified person can do the test. Doesn't have to be a certified tester, does not have to be a certified installer. Of course, there's 2 methods for the testing. You can do a vacuum test or you can do a hydro test. So I explain this, what basically There is. Now, I also understand there's some new test equipment available. May already be approved that you can do a dry test also, but I haven't have that much information concerning all that. So Buster publishes in their guidance actually a format and checklist on how to do a spill bucket testing. And they also talk about how you can do your tank top sumps also. But only systems installed after March of 01-05 have to have their sumps tested in Ohio. So let's look a little bit closer. So I have a real diverse client base there, and there's a group of businesses and industries in the Toledo area that formed a consortium back in 1960, and it's called the Safety Council of Northwest Ohio. So they basically teach all kind of things like forklift training, defensive driving, things with OSHA and stuff like that. So back in 2012, when the new UST regs came out for operator training, they were looking to help do that for their consortium of businesses. So they went out and they basically hired me as an adjunct instructor at their facility for their members. So in January of this year, I went back to their board of directors and said, hey, all the regulations are changing. Some of these people haven't been in class for 3 or 4 years. There's significant changes, and they really need to know about it. So I gave them about a 15-slide presentation on all the changes and say, do you want to have another class, sort of an update for the new regs? So they voted and said, hey, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And so a lot of the comments and concerns you hear today is from those type of people who were in the class. So I met back with Buster early in January 2018, and it's funny because Ohio EPA's downtown Columbus, Buster's, the State Farm Marshal, they're out in Reynoldsville, I think it is, about 15 miles away. So initially I wanted to get them both in the same room because I knew we were going to have problems about the wastewater, and they wouldn't meet together. So I spent time downtown Columbus, I had to run out to Reynoldsville, then go back and forth. And at one point, they actually said, the Ohio EPA guy said to me, well, I really don't care so much about this because Buster got all the money from EPA for this anyway, so I really don't care. So, so it was sort of depressing to me about that. But they were very emphatic, hey, if you go have your clients do the testing, they got to be aware of the hazardous waste regs. So, US EPA published a great compendium here on the 68 pages of the topics, and one of the topics was, spill bucket testing. And there's probably about 8 pages on there, and this is really well written. I give a lot of credit to whoever did this. Problem is, it really boxes in that it has to be a hazardous waste. So most of my clients don't read the regular regulations, let alone 68 pages from somewhere else. So this is basically what I talked to them about. Hey, if you go ahead and do a hydro test on a spill bucket, especially gasoline, this is what's going to happen. Is it ignitable or benzene? And, of course, T-clip is the test for benzene. But I also explained to them about immediate impacted debris from regulated UST releases exempt as a hazardous waste for benzene only. But then, the problem is I couldn't make an argument that any type of benzene in a tank top sump actually had to come out of the tank, so that should be immediate contaminated debris. But it's sort of a moot point because once you put water in a gasoline spill bucket, you have no exemption. So, two of my clients are convenience store retailers. So one has 21 locations, the other one has 71. So I talked to them early in January and say, hey, looking at all the spill bucket testing, what do you guys plan to do? You could be hazardous waste. Are you guys hazardous waste generators? And do you have EPA ID numbers per site? So, the one client says, yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with that because I used to have a job and, I was familiar with the regulations years ago. And then the other 3 people that are responsible for environmental stuff, just their head, they just got that glazed over look. So I started talking to them about it. Well, you have to be trained on the regs if you're going to be a generator. So I just went to Google, and for a RCRA training, it's like $450. Then I talked to them and said, well, you now have to be trained under USDOT to be able to sign the manifest. And that's like $500, but it's only good for every 3 years. So then you have to have a hazardous waste generator ID number per site. You have to have biannual reporting. You have to have emergency coordinator on call and information posted on site. You have to have a waste minimization plan and a certificate that you're doing that. Weekly inspection of any of those containers. No container within 50 feet of the property line. But however, Ohio, US EPA now has an e-manifest system. all right? But in order to be a part of that, you have to attend 2 online seminars that they put on. Plus, I think it's $125 per manifest that you generate, all right, to be able to use the system. So, but USDOT is not on board yet with the e-manifest. So you still have to have a paper manifest, even going through all the electronic manifest. And so you're still going to sign a piece of paper. And I have a lot of farmers and farmer associations in Ohio when I go out and talk to them, so I always throw something farmer-related in there. So I threw in this one about the farmers can triple rinse pesticide containers and dispose of residue on their own farm, just to try to, give them some reference. So, first thing that comes back is the client's complaining, hey, I thought this was going to cost a hell of a lot less than, $1,000. That's just for hazardous waste. And I go, yeah, EPA did have this report, made back in 2015 that talked about some of the costs. So like one of the cost operability tests for release detection, like $126. Well, that's not really good. Cost to owners to read the regulations, $9. I can't read 69 pages at minimum wage and make $9. So, and then one of them's operator training, I think it was only like $54, something like that. I don't know any place, any state that charges probably less than $75. Most of us are around $200 to $300. So now some of my clients are really annoyed with all the regulations only because what they were told, what their associations were telling them, I'm telling them a completely different story. So, I tried to explain to them the number one way to get out of the hazardous waste regs is to get it into a sanitary sewer system, particularly a publicly owned treatment works, commonly known as a PLTW, because right in there's a RCRA domestic sewage exclusion. Any substance discharged to a PLTW, if otherwise disposed of, would be considered a RCRA hazardous waste. So as long as they accept it, it's not hazardous waste. But they're most probably going to want it tested for benzene. But almost all wastewater treatment plants don't use T-clip. They use the 600 series EPA, in particular EPA 620. Plus, you got to give notification. You're supposed to go back and tell Ohio EPA about it and US EPA that that's how you're going to be handling everything. So, a lot of the owners manage tank water bottoms by just having a truck come and pull the water and gasoline off, and they take it off facility where it's recycled. All right. And so the water fuel mixture is removed, and it's back, and it's what's called off-spec. So you said, hey, I had a fuel here. It's now got water mixed in. I'm taking it off as off-spec. It's not a waste. They're going to somehow, usually gravity, separate the water from the fuel. The fuel will get reused. The water will get disposed of somewhere under some sort of NIPTES permit. And there's no criteria for the percent of fuel and water mixed. So some of them were saying, hey, can we get it done that way? Well, I said, well, I don't know. Let's talk a little bit more. But if you dig into the regulations, the best way to keep your benzene down is to wipe the spill bucket clean first with a piece of cloth. Number one thing. Except now, in Ohio, that could be a waste, but it's conditionally excluded as a hazardous waste under a rule called solvent-contaminated wipes, where you're allowed to have them go laundered somewhere, and it's not a hazardous waste. But if I have cotton gloves on doing that, the gloves are a hazardous waste. So this time my clients' heads are starting to get bigger and bigger. So I dug down a little bit deeper. This is solvent-contaminated wipes, basically how to get them done. They have to be accumulated by the generator. You have some points and stuff like that. But deep in the regulations, it talks about no free liquids. Okay? So then you also have to give written notice to the laundry that you're taking it to, to tell them, hey, there's some gasoline or benzene in here, make sure you guys can take it and things like that. So one of my guys said, hey, can I just take it to the self-serve laundromat and say, hey, I need to wash these here, just smell them, the attendant there. And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, I'm never going to get them back. I'm just going to leave them there. And I said, I don't need to hear any more. So I have to help him decide what the free liquids are. So basically they talk about free liquids. You have to use a paint filters test. All right, so what's that? Well, you have to get a 60 mesh or 200 micron. You have to put whatever your cloth is in there, wait 5 minutes. If anything drips out of it, basically you failed your test. So, where are we going to get that 60 mesh or 200? And I go, those are usually like a paint filter. Like for a 5-gallon bucket, you can get them on Amazon. Just get that and you can get one. So I said, but whatever you do, make sure it doesn't drip. So So what I told them, hey, the best way to make sure this is not a hazardous waste is get it into a POTW. You may still have to test it depending on who you do. Probably going to have to do method 620, and I try to give them reference. Hey, 5 parts per billion benzene is your drinking water standard. So then in the back of my mind is, okay, so let's say I did test that hydro test water, and it was less than 5, it meets a drinking water standard. I just dump it on the ground. I wouldn't hardly ever recommend that, but it's food for thought. And, hey, can I have off-spec drinking water? Can I put my drinking water in the bucket, and then because I got it contaminated with benzene, is that now off-spec if I just go clean it and, drink it? Could I have that? These are all conjured up by a lot of my clients. And, of course, I talk to them, 500 part per billion is a hazardous waste. So we tell them, hey, you can test the spill buckets with vacuum if you don't have the water. Some of them are going to go buy the equipment. It's about $6,000.
Probably a good thing.
Talk to them, especially if the bucket fails. You've got problems in Ohio if you have a visually stained or odorous pea stone under there. You have to call that in as a release. And I told him, you're going to have to hire a consultant right then and there, too. And then I said, try to dispose the hydro test water at a POTW. But if you drum or transport the used fluid ready for disposal, fluid's now a hazardous waste. So, in the real world, a lot of my clients out there are like maintenance personnel at fleet vehicle facilities. Some of them are farmer associations. And a lot of them are like water treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants, jails, hospitals, law enforcement, county highway departments. So it's not your typical convenience store type of guys, and they're just looking to try to be in compliance. So, one of my clients is a municipal water plant up on Lake Erie. They have emergency generators, gasoline USTs that need to hydro test water from spill buckets, and that, of course, for their system, because they had double wall piping installed from the tank tops. So we go a mile down the lake shore to the same municipality's wastewater treatment plant and talk to their pre-treatment guy, and he's sort of, okay, maybe that sounds okay, but I got to talk to the superintendent, all right? So we go talk to the superintendent, says, hey, I have 80 gallons of, water, probably with gasoline in there to dispose. And it's a 15.7 million gallons per day into Lake Erie. Supervisor says, hey, no way, I'm never going to let that happen and stuff like that. And I go, this is 80 gallons and 1.57 million. And then they said the term I heard 30 years ago. The solution to pollution is not dilution. So, problem 2. One of the clients was a municipal fire department. They also wanted to educate their members on fueling systems. So they're wondering if they could just use the UST fuel diesel as the hydro test fluid. And then later use that hydro test fluid for live fire extinguisher training. They have like a pan, they light the pan, and they put it out with fire extinguishers. So I said, it doesn't sound like a bad idea. So, that's what they envision. Hey, we're going to take our guys out, we're going to show them how fuel systems work, we'll show them hydro tests, and we'll go back and we'll do that. So, unfortunately, I said, hey, you got to look at the industry standards, make sure you're doing everything to RP 1200-17. But if you dig down in there, right there under 6.2, warning, Will Robinson, danger, do not use fuel such as gasoline, E85, or diesel. So that's thrown out. All right? And that makes sense. I'm not going to ever advocate someone to use gasoline as their hydro test fluid. And here's all the members on that, and I know most of these guys by face or talk to and stuff like that. But, in the real world, have they ever really had fire extinguisher training? And you ever try to light a pan of diesel fluid? It's almost impossible. So I'm really saying, I could have probably gone to any volunteer fire company, offered them $100, $150, had 2 guys out there, tested a spill bucket with diesel fluid, and been okay. And I put the diesel fluid right back into the gasoline tank if I had to. But then, hey, what happens to a fund if that spill bucket fails and I put diesel in a tank that had gasoline? Would they even cover that? So, so it sounds like that's no path to compliance either. So, one client had 21 locations where all the spill buckets required testing, but only 2 locations required the tank top sumps to be tested. So site number 1 that had the tank top sumps tested, it was in that same municipality that won't let their water treatment plant put it in the sewer, so that was gone. And then the second site was located in a municipality with a wastewater plant, but they wouldn't accept it either. And unfortunately, I got stuck talking to the engineer. If you guys go do any of this, never talk to the wastewater engineer. Always try to talk to the plant operator. Engineers, these guys, especially in sewage, they assume no risks. They don't want to do anything with anything. So lesson learned there. One of the 21 sites had a car wash that discharged under a permit to the PLTW, and in fact that site was located in a city that had an oil refinery too. So they agreed to take the hydrotest water without any testing, all right? And that was one of the reasons was because that site actually had an oil water separator. And that was one of their criteria, no free product into the sewer. So all the hydrotest water was reused from site to site, all 21 sites, finishing at the site with a car wash where it was discharged. So that hydrotest water traveled 237 miles to get it out of being a hazardous waste. So, summary and conclusions. Vast majority of UST owners want to do the right thing, but they get extremely frustrated trying to navigate through all the regulations, let alone hazardous waste regs. And sometimes I can't logically explain the regulations to them. I talk about if diesel fuel could have been used as a hydrotest fluid, under a fire professional or a professional engineer providing a safety protocol, I could probably have convinced them, that would be a way to go. But, I don't think anybody is like a tank tester ever wanted to do that. Too much risk. And then I worry about the fun. If that was a diesel release on a site that never had diesel in a tank, would they cover that? So, that's probably a no pathway to compliance there. And gasoline impacted hydrotest water leaks into the environment with a failed test, so when it leaks in the ground, it's exempt as a hazardous waste. But if the containment is tight, that same hydrotest water is a hazardous waste. That's the number one remark I get back from my classes, and I go, "It's just the regulations. I can't help you any there." And then I'm not convinced that the regulated tank contractors are completely compliant with hydrotest water disposal. And so when I talk to some of my clients, a couple things happened. A couple of these places said, "Hey, our spill buckets are like 20-some years old. We're just going to go put new ones in. This way we won't even have to test the old ones. When the new ones get tested, I can get rid of that water because it'll never have any gasoline in it." So a lot of them chose to do that. They just went ahead and said, get new spill buckets. But some of my clients go, "Hey, I talked to my tank testing guys, and they can do it this way and that." And I go, "I don't know if that really sounds right." So I developed a little questionnaire for them, and, I'm not really convinced they're following everything like that, but, and I'm an agent for some of my clients where I sign for things, stuff like that, and I said, "Hey, listen, you're going down a path I'm not really comfortable for, if you want to believe your contractor on that, that's fine too, It's just like, every time I go to the doctor, he goes, "Bob, go lose 30, 40 pounds," and I say, "Yep, I will," and I never do it. So, I'm used to giving advice that never gets listened to. So, I suggest that states could follow what Alabama did, because I went down there for a stakeholder meeting. Basically, I said, "Hey, I got a cloth wipe from the spill bucket. What am I supposed to do with that?" They go, "Throw it in the dumpster." I said, "What about all this test water? Is it considered hazardous waste?" They go, "No, our program's under the hazardous waste in Alabama, so we've already talked to our guys. They say as long as that goes somewhere under a NIPTES permit, it'll be fine. And if you have problems trying to get rid of it, come see us and we'll find you someplace nearby that has that type of permit." So, thanks for the opportunity here today. I just want to give you some stories from the field.
Hey, our next speaker is Mahesh Albuquerque. Mahesh is the director of the Colorado Division of Oil and Public Safety and has served in that role for over a decade. He oversees Colorado's UST and above-ground storage tank compliance cleanup fund and weights and measures. Mahesh?
Thanks, and good afternoon. I thought it was pretty disappointing or depressing set of sessions out here that we just had with snakes and sumps and just the hassle of dealing with the sump water. And I wish I had better news to kind of follow up with, but I don't. So it's just going to kind of be on that same theme. The other thing, how many of you were here at 8 o'clock for the first session this morning? I'd almost say you guys can leave. I'm kind of apologize, but I'm going to be covering some of what I covered out there, but I'm trying to focus on something a little different. I talked about incentives, and it is around some of this, so hopefully you'll still get something out of it. So What I'm going to talk about is buckets, not sumps, spill buckets. They're not containment, at least in the sump realm of things. And what I'm not going to talk about is really how you test the bucket. So there's vacuum testing or hydro testing or fog testing or whatever other testing could be done. What I'm going to be talking about is just some of the things that you need to consider when you do your testing and you find releases. So some of you who were here in the morning saw this slide. Pretty much, if you look back at the last decade or so, things have been looking pretty good, promising in the tanks program. This is probably the only promising slide I have, but it was, higher operational compliance, reduction in cleanup backlog, and fewer new releases. And then the 2015 regs come into effect, and a lot of states are adopting them with different sorts of deadlines. Essentially, when you start testing some of this equipment, especially the older equipment, it's very likely that it'll fail. They weren't designed to last forever, and there's going to be associated releases reported. If there's a couple things that I'd like to kind of have you take from my presentation out here, and it'll be kind of brief, is these next two slides. So I think it's been a common practice for decades now where, we're kind of human nature. You go, you find a problem, you inspect it, you see, this thing needs to be fixed. You go ahead and you fix it, replace or repair, and then you test. And this is not exactly, it helps you report a passing test to the regulator. It's great from that standpoint. You had something that you inspected that you saw was defective, you put in something new, and then you test it, and you got a great passing test, and you submit that in there. But I think this is really what should be done, and which is you go out, you do your inspection, you really test and assess, and Kevin had that great slide with the STP kind of spewing fuel every time somebody was fueling at that station. The whole reason we have containment and containment testing and any sort of that is to prevent releases to the environment. And so ensuring that containment is tight is to prevent environmental impacts. And so I think what often gets forgotten is that second step in there is we go from here's an issue, let's fix it, and forget about did it have a release or not, and was that assessed, and is that being addressed and kind of cleaned up. And I think it's kind of the number one reason for when you look at source and cause data where releases are coming from, the large majority, like 70% or so, when you look at EPA's website, is from unknown. And I think the unknown is because of the standard practice that has gone on kind of all across the country for decades now, where we may not be assessing adequately when we repair or upgrade equipment. So kind of that first part is the inspection when you go out and inspect a sump, and as Kevin said, it's pretty obvious sometimes to see that you have cracks or kind of failures with your spill bucket here, and that would be kind of going back to those two arrow slides that I had. This would be a suspected release. You have a failure at the bottom of the spill bucket. Even though it doesn't routinely contain product, when you do a fill, it's very likely over the period of its lifespan to have some fuel that could have gotten out of there. So we'd say that would be a suspected release, and you need to follow up. And so what I'm focusing on is more the environmental side of the assessment. You would need to kind of confirm whether you did or didn't have a release. And there's two methods that I think most people are familiar with. You could either confirm it using a system test, which is a tightness test. If it's not that obvious, you would do a hydro or a vacuum test or some other test to determine whether your spill bucket was tight or not. If it was tight, then you can rule out that suspected release kind of goes away, that it wasn't confirmed. Or you could do a site check, which is actually going out into the soils around that containment, that spill bucket, and checking for the presence of contamination. In Colorado, it's like everywhere else, it's opening up a can of worms if you start assessing under there. And it makes it even more complicated just based on the location of where your spill bucket is with respect to your tank and other containment and other tank top fittings that are likely to leak. But what we do require is you can field screen the pea gravel around under the spill bucket. You use that as your suspected release. We would even allow a sample be collected of that soil, and if it has hits above our cleanup standards, we would say you could call that a confirmed release. You would still need to go out and do an assessment, placing borings around the tank to define extent and all of that, and address it that way. But this is an often forgotten step when you do equipment upgrades on containment, spill buckets, and other stuff. So, again, more bad news, I guess. It's very likely going to be high failure rates when you start testing this equipment, whether it be spill buckets or containment. And as Kevin pointed out, it's when you talk about sumps and other containment, in our state, like I suspect in most others, it is containment that is used when you have interstitial monitoring that's used. If you don't, there's this huge inequity in the federal rule right now that, as Kevin clearly pointed out, if you could have equipment on the ground that's dripping fuel into the ground and there's no testing requirement, but if you do have you have a better system, you're using interstitial monitoring, you do have to test that containment. But it's very likely that there'll be many new releases discovered if you do it correctly, and it'll have impact on cleanup funds, but also on the availability of equipment and all of that. I talked about this morning, but we looked at data to see like what sort of failure rates should we be expecting, and they're pretty high. From some work that Cromco did years ago, decades ago, they had reported a failure rate of 60% when you test spill buckets. We had a national convenience store operating in our state, and they had replaced 115 spill buckets a couple of years ago, and they reported a 70% failure rate when they did their testing. So it's not, it's not out of line with what Cromco had found out decades ago. Some of the lessons learned. Again, 60 to 70% of equipment that you test, especially on the spill bucket side, will likely fail. In states like Colorado, it may be a little more severe. We have issues with ice. I haven't seen anyone use insulation yet, but we have ice issues, and that contracting really causes damage to spill buckets. Not to talk about the snowplow getting the top off them. But kind of one of the things to really kind of keep in mind is with all of the testing, spill bucket testing, containment testing, if your state's adopted a 3-year deferral, most people are going to wait till the last minute to do their testing. So anything you can do to try to get that done earlier, I think would benefit you, would benefit the tank owner. It's going to be cheaper, easier to get a contractor sooner rather than later. And what we've done in Colorado is actually provide some incentives to help people kind of move along and get some of their testing kind of done earlier rather than waiting to the end. Just wanted to share some data that we've learned. So we adopted our regulations in Colorado that took effect January 1 of last year, 2017, and we included a 3-year period. So January 1 of 2020 is when everyone would have to have all their spill buckets tested and their containment if they're using interstitial monitoring done. Of the 150 spill buckets that were replaced, 69% had an associated release. So, yeah, just wanted to show 3 lines of evidence here where that number is not looking that great. It's a high failure rate. As kind of the last speaker said,